Hi there, welcome back to the channel. I'm Dr. Richard McKinnon. I'm a chartered psychologist and coach. And on this channel, I share insights from the world of psychology to help you be your best self at work. Now, I'm just back from attending and speaking at the Health and Wellbeing at Work conference up in Birmingham. And I'm really aware that lots of people can't make it to these events or can't attend a specific session within the conference. So in this video, what I want to do is walk through my presentation, which is all about how increasing our psychological flexibility can help us deal more sustainably with the kinds of challenges we face in the workplace. Not crises, not catastrophes, but the day-to-day stuff that can make life more difficult. So let's dive in. What I wanted to achieve with this was twofold. One, introduce people to the concept of psychological flexibility and frame it as something that arises from developing skills. Because if we frame this as skill development, anyone can develop it. This is not something we are born with, we possess or we don't possess. These are skills that when practiced and brought to life, we get the resulting psychological flexibility and all of the good stuff that comes with it. First of all, what do we mean by psychological flexibility? Those of you who have been listening to my podcast or watching my videos for any length of time will be familiar with it. But let's start. The most important thing that I wanted to mention at this conference was that it's an evidence-based framework. At a well-being event, not everything that we encounter is going to be equally supported by the science or even have any evidence supporting it. So with the decades of high-quality research supporting this, we want to emphasize that we know how it works and for whom it works. It has its roots in the world of mental health, where it's known as acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. But of course, in addition to supporting people better deal with mental health conditions, it's been translated for lots of other contexts like social work, like education, and of course the workplace. And I'll elaborate on a moment on how I bring it to life in the workplace. But these are skills. And while this is being framed as skills for work, and I want to share lots of examples about how psychological flexibility can improve work and our experience of the workplace, these are also skills for life. It's a piece of feedback I get so regularly from clients that they take what they've used from the psychological flexibility skill set and they bring it to life at work and they get a good result, but that they bring it home or they bring it out into their community or their social life. And they use these skills to navigate the challenges they encounter in those contexts. Broadly speaking, the benefits that we get from increasing our psychological flexibility are our tendency to be more persistent in orientation towards our goals. We're more likely to work towards those goals, and it has a positive impact on our well-being. When we are more psychologically flexible, we're doing more of what matters to us. We've got clarity on what matters. We're able to bypass the things that might come between us and what matters, and we emphasize the action that brings us towards what matters. I shared an academic definition, one that comes from a book I often find myself recommending, The Mindful and Effective Employee by Paul Flaxman, Frank Bond, and Frederick Lifheim. If you know anything about this space, those names will be very, very familiar to you. I remain grateful to them for the fantastic work they've done in this space. They frame psychological flexibility as the ability to fully contact the present moment. So we're present, we're in the here and now, and the thoughts and feelings it contains. So we're aware of what our mind is giving us in the present moment without needless defense. This is a really important bit. When we're psychologically flexible, we don't try and suppress thoughts, remove thoughts, change thoughts. We don't respond to them automatically. We just acknowledge them. And depending on the situation, so we're aware of the context we're in, we persist in or change behavior in the pursuit of values and values-based goals. So this really means we're using our values to guide our behavior, not a passing thought or a flash of emotion. And it's based on the context. So we're being sensitive to the context we're in. This is quite a detailed and inclusive definition, but it's not one I expect you to memorize. So let me share what I say to my clients. I say that psychological flexibility comes about when we learn how to show up, we let go, and we get moving. We show up in the present moment, being the version of ourselves that's most appropriate to that present moment. We let go of struggles with our thoughts and emotions, and we get moving. We take action in the direction of what really matters to us, in the direction of our values. Now, I wanted to put this in context and talk about how I bring it to life in the work that I do. The development work that I do with individuals and teams and on larger scale programs is usually built on three pillars. And we might have modules, or we might have coaching sessions, or we might have a specific course that focuses on topics that people will be familiar with, topics that make sense to them. But the pillars that underpin it are these three. Building contextual awareness. You can see the link with that definition, right? Being aware of the context I'm in, but also what's going on for me in this context and the wider context, like organizationally. How do we do things here? What's the culture? What's going on in this organization? And also a certain amount of awareness of the extra-organizational context. What's going on in society? What's happening in the world? And then intrapersonal focus. This includes things like building my self-awareness, understanding what motivates me, what matters to me, understanding more about my personality, my preferences, all of this stuff that helps me know me better. And then thirdly, the interpersonal side of things, getting along with others, building relationships, being intentional about how I communicate with other people, learning how to get the most from the people around me. Some of those skills include things like learning how to delegate, learning how to give feedback, all of that stuff. And these are three really important kind of non-negotiable elements of development, because we can quite easily see what would happen if we left one or more of these out of the equation. Psychological flexibility, the skill set that gives us this flexibility, speaks really nicely to these three pillars. And of course, I can bring this to life, and we do regularly in coaching contexts one-to-one. And this helps individuals get clarity on what really matters to them and make the changes in their life that are really valued by them, maybe bypass the self-talk and the self-limiting beliefs that have held them back until that point. In team development contexts, we're able to help people better understand each other, maybe use values as a framework for signposting what's important to them and signposting why they're doing what they're doing, and building mutual understanding and collaboration and improved communication. We're aiming for better team effectiveness here, right? In leadership development contexts, and spoiler alert, you're going to hear a lot more about leadership development from me and my colleagues in the coming months. But in leadership development, this is so key. Boosting psychological flexibility is so important so that leaders can be what's expected of them, so that they do less avoidance of uncomfortable things, do more of the stuff that's really important or just simply necessary, and can engage in the effective role modeling that we expect from our organizational leaders, so they can demonstrate the behaviors that work there and serve as an effective role model for their colleagues. And of course, in well-being programs, these skills are almost a prerequisite, actually. On the programs that I run, I often front load them with these psychological flexibility skills, because they then facilitate delegates on the program from experimenting with new skills, new approaches. It can help clear the decks of those self-limiting beliefs. It can really importantly answer the question, why? Why would I make these changes? Because we're able to link it back to their values. And of course, we know from the research that improving psychological flexibility by itself improves our well-being. This is all to say that these skills get us benefits in numerous contexts. It works in various ways, and it can be brought to life in different contexts, in different domains of people development. Now, when I want to support someone develop their psychological flexibility, they almost certainly haven't come to me with that stated goal. They haven't come to me and said, Richard, I really want to be more psychologically flexible. But it is a toolkit to enable them to get where they want to be. And that could be change in behavior to improve their well-being. It could be change in behavior to prevent them from procrastinating so much, or a change in behavior to allow them to step up into a new position of authority or seniority in the organization. The second thing to bear in mind is whether it's coaching or training or a program, we're not starting from zero. We're not starting from a total absence of psychological flexibility, but it is useful to understand the sort of opposite of flexibility so that we can recognize any of that in ourselves that's present, normalize it, and identify what it is that we want to change. So we're not changing the person, we're giving them skills to enable the changes that they want to make. And in talking about psychological rigidity, well, at the conference, I asked people to raise their hands when they had identified with any of these. Again, not to make people feel bad, but to normalize it. This is, to a certain extent, how we're wired. This is, to a certain extent, to be expected of us. And when we behave in a more flexible way, that's not the norm. That's maybe exceptional. So what I wanted to do was walk through these examples of rigidity so that people could better understand them and the impact that they have. So we start with mental time travel. When we want to plan, we're going to the future in our minds. When we want to reflect, we're going to the past in our mind. Both of those activities are really, really helpful. But we can also go to the future and the past in our mind unintentionally. We can be brought to a scary future or a disappointing past, for example, by our mind. And when we do that, we're taken away from the present moment and the information it provides. We're taken away from the present moment and the responsibilities that sit in that present moment. And we just get caught up with the emotions, potentially, that scary future or disappointing past can cause. So it's something that we can all identify with. What we're trying to do is learn how to notice when we're doing it and come back to the present moment. Secondly, we can also have quite inflexible or oversimplified views of ourselves. And I use that little icon of an ID badge on my slides to illustrate that. It's as if we've taken our entire identity and reduced it to something like a job, a job title, a role, a level of seniority, or another aspect of our identity like parental status, marital status, or something like income. Now, the challenge with this is twofold. It's more than twofold, but let me mention two key points. One, we are all much more complex and interesting than one or two labels. And two, a lot of the things that we attach ourselves to or hold on to too tightly are temporary in nature. So at some point, if I said to myself, I am my job, I won't have a job, either because someone makes that decision for me or because I exit the workforce. At some point, I will not have this job. So the danger of over-identifying with it is quite significant. I may no longer have the income I over-identify with, or the job title, or the level of seniority, or, the example I often share is I might go into a room and I'm no longer the smartest person in the room, or I'm no longer the most experienced or technically able, or whatever it is. So when we have this inflexible view of ourselves, one of the things is that challenges we face in the workplace can challenge those views of ourselves. And we may not respond well to those challenges because we're not viewing them as facets of us. We're viewing it as us. So it's not a challenge to my specific skill. It's a challenge to me and my identity. We can all get caught up with what our mind gives us. Buying into thoughts, believing thoughts, believing all of the self-talk, placing more weight on mental imagery than what's actually happening in the environment around us. And incidentally, going through each of these, hands were shooting up in the room. Everyone could identify with this. The problem with getting too caught up with our thoughts is that, of course, our mind is a thinking machine and it's producing mental content constantly. Not all of these thoughts are going to be true. Not all of them are going to be helpful. Not all of them are going to be helpful in context. But we know that certain of them can grab us away from the present moment, or exert such an impact on our behavior. We're listening to the dictator within. That's a nice phrase Steve Hayes uses to describe that sort of demandingness that can come from within us. Not gentle thoughts or suggestions, but an ultimatum from your own mind. Another aspect of having a mind is that we'll feel uncomfortable from time to time, not physical pain or even danger or threat, but all the thoughts and feelings we don't want to experience. We can collectively call that stuff psychological discomfort. And there's a real risk we can build up the habit of looking to avoid that at all costs. We find ourselves avoiding, moving away from, looking to minimize or completely remove discomfort from our experience. Now, you'll probably realize, if you're thinking about this in any way objectively, that with discomfort comes growth. Or in other words, lots of the stuff you're proud of today that you managed to accomplish or work through was preceded by or accompanied by lots and lots of discomfort. So it's not sustainable to do this. We can also lose sight of what matters to us. We would summarize this as our values. When we're not clear on what matters to us, well, one thing is we can get caught up and bothered by and wind ourselves up about things that do not matter. We can lose a sense of direction and a sense of purpose and meaning, which is really, really important. And finally, another example of this psychological rigidity is behaving automatically. Something I said at the conference was that this is not about the helpful habits. They're automatic behaviors. But those daily helpful habits, like take your shoes off when you come home, brush your teeth in the morning, all of those things that we do, these are sort of automatic when we're not paying attention to the context, when we're potentially doing them to self-soothe in the face of discomfort, when they're not what we would intentionally do, but what we're doing in response to an automatic behavior. So that's what it could look like to be psychologically rigid. And as I said, this is not our starting point for everyone. We're not zero, but we can probably all identify with examples where we've lost track of time, going off into our own thoughts, where we've really bought into our own thoughts, when we've decided not to take action because it would be uncomfortable, not a nightmare, not a disaster, but just uncomfortable, and so on. So I'm laying the ground here to say all of these have sort of an opposite in terms of the skills that we want to develop. Now, I use the analogy of the smoke alarm. Our mind can work a lot like a smoke alarm. At home, your smoke alarm is activated by smoke, but it makes the same kind of awful screeching sound whether you've burnt some toast or your living room is on fire. And this is a way of getting across the fact that sometimes our mind can give us serious, demanding, screeching messages about danger, when in fact, what we would really experience is just some discomfort. And part of our job is to be able to better distinguish between the two. Yes, it's helpful to not go down that dark alley at night. That probably does represent a risk to our well-being, our security, our safety. But speaking up in a meeting, calling someone unannounced, introducing yourself to someone, knuckling down and finishing that paperwork, none of that is a threat to your well-being. None of that will result in physical pain. But our mind can conflate the two. So core to this is recognizing what would be uncomfortable when it comes to these workplace challenges and what would be seriously dangerous or very high risk. Our tendency to conflate them is what stops us in our tracks a lot of the time. I made the point when speaking in Birmingham that even the best workplace, even the most nicely crafted, organized, the best organizational culture will still include challenges, because the best workplace is not free of challenge and difficulty. Good work comes with an appropriate level of challenge. But even the nicest workplace will give us opportunities to feel uncomfortable. And it's what we do with that stuff that really matters. So I'm not talking about environments where we are exposed to physical risk and danger. I'm talking about where that's not an issue. It's more the stuff we think is uncomfortable. So, for example, speaking up in a meeting, that could be really uncomfortable. Or speaking out and sharing our dissenting or minority view. How we give feedback or receive feedback, how we deal with organizational change or ambiguous situations, how we approach challenging tasks or new tasks, or how we stay focused while the tasks aren't that exciting, how we manage to persist through setbacks and keep our focus, and how we navigate the almost endless opportunity for interpersonal challenges, misunderstandings, disagreements, friction. By no means a finite list, but just some examples of the sources or potential sources of psychological discomfort in a typical workplace. Would we want these to stop us in our tracks and prevent action? No, we would not. The good stuff happens on the other side of these. Fortunately, we don't always respond to discomfort in a helpful way. An overemphasis on how comfortable or uncomfortable a task is can lead us to procrastinate or engage in too much preparation before finishing or making a decision, for example. It can result in us making some impulsive behavioral responses. It can result in that anticipatory anxiety that we refer to as the Sunday scaries at the weekend. A Sunday afternoon is eaten up with thoughts and worries about the week ahead, when you'd much rather be engaged with the people close to you in your life or your hobbies, or just simply resting and recovering from the week gone by. And the rumination that can come with revisiting and going over and over past disappointments or challenges, not learning from them, but reliving them in an unhelpful way. We can decide to keep our views to ourselves. We can decide to avoid the interpersonal risks, absenting ourselves or withdrawing from social situations that just might be uncomfortable. And there's a lot we know about the downside of this. We're social creatures after all, but the impact this kind of behavior can have on our performance, but also our well-being. This is an important point. Without the level of interpersonal connection that we would ideally like, we can begin to feel lonely. And that has a toxic impact on our well-being, our immune system, if nothing else. I'll link to some resources about the impact of loneliness on our well-being in the notes that accompany this, including a free paper that you can download that explores how to bring these particular skills to life to overcome that experience of loneliness. Fundamentally, we might engage in just the avoidance of experiences, experiential avoidance, where we're not exposing ourselves to situations that we know will be or just might be slightly uncomfortable. We're playing it overly safe. But of course, without that exposure to discomfort and the situations that give rise to it, we won't learn, we won't grow, we won't develop. We'll be looking to avoid, we'll be looking to minimize, we'll be looking to control. And we won't be focused on what's important, the goals, the tasks, the values that give us a sense of purpose and meaning. So what I would like to spend the remainder of this time on is talking about these skills themselves and how we can bring them to life. This journey towards increasing our psychological flexibility is based on the acquisition and obviously the deployment of 6 skills. And I simplify that as the 3 themes that I mentioned at the outset: showing up, letting go, and getting moving, taking helpful action. So the first of these themes, show up. 2 skills here: learning how to be present and aware and connected in the present moment. And this replaces our tendency to engage in mental time travel. So when we are present, given the context I'm talking about, we're able to notice what's actually happening in our environment. We're able to use the information the present moment gives us rather than what we imagine will happen or what happened a long time ago. That present moment connection is so powerful for dealing with challenges because we can, in one sense, use our five senses to gather information and not over-rely on the stream of stuff our mind is giving us. Secondly, we've cultivated a flexible self-concept. We're not overemphasizing any one aspect of what makes us who we are. We're not oversimplifying ourselves. We're not holding on to it too tightly and responding unhelpfully when we feel it's threatened. But in fact, we're aware that we're made up of millions of data points. And actually, when we show up, we're emphasizing those bits of our identity that are appropriate to the context we're actually in. It also speaks to things like being able to be flexible with our interpretation and our perspective taking in a given situation. And that is the opposite of, wearing a little badge that said, I'm the expert, I am the boss, I am only, talking ourselves down. So this combination of presence allows us to reach into what makes us us and utilize that and utilize the information from the present moment and not drift off into our imagination or our memory. Secondly, we're learning how to let go. And I use this phrase, letting go of struggles with what's going on inside. So instead of trying to control thoughts, remove thoughts, minimize discomfort or avoid discomfort, we're learning two skills here. One, we call it cognitive diffusion. Rather than buying into all of our thoughts, believing them all as true, or looking through them, in other words, seeing the world through the lens of those thoughts, we're learning how to look at our thoughts, to see them as mental experiences. We're learning to see them for what they are. They're just thoughts. And actually, this seemed to cut through the noise during my presentation, because I saw a number of people mention this when they spoke about the presentation on LinkedIn, for example. A thought is just a thought. It's one of the most powerful things we can remember about our experience as a human with a mind. They're just thoughts, and I don't have to do anything with them. I don't have to respond to them. I don't have to comply with them. They're just thoughts. And similarly, we don't have to avoid everything that's uncomfortable. And not everything that's uncomfortable is dangerous. And some discomfort is simply the price of entry. If we're going to do meaningful stuff, if we're going to do stuff that has an impact in the world, if we're going to do things that are our responsibility, they may come with a sprinkling or a big heaping of discomfort. But if we can see it as part of it and not an option, we won't waste our time and our energy and our behavior looking for ways to make it easier or more comfortable or hope that with time it will get easier. We do it. It unleashes our capacity to take helpful action. And the third theme, get moving, take action, take helpful action. So here we're learning how to be clear on our values. We're cultivating an awareness of what matters to us, and we're able to notice what matters to us in the moment we're actually in. And we're learning how to use our values to give us a sense of direction and to guide our behavior rather than demanding thoughts or those flashes of emotion, like everything that fits in the discomfort bucket. So we're using it a lot like a compass, and that's the visual I use all the time for this. Values serve to give us a sense of direction that we can follow. They don't tell us exactly what to do, but they show us that valued direction. And of course, it's last on my list, but it's far from the least important. Engaging in committed action. In other words, intentional action. Rather than automatic, avoidant responses to the world around us, we're moving in the direction of what really matters to us. By the way, if you're finding this useful, interesting, thought-provoking, you might want to consider either subscribing to this channel or sharing this video with someone in your network. The whole reason this channel exists is to get information like this in front of as big an audience as possible. And of course, if you're liking it so far, don't be afraid to hit like below. So in a sense, making contact with the present moment flexibly and giving up the struggle with all of that stuff inside of us, all that private experience of thoughts and emotions, it frees us up to bring values to the surface and to do more of what matters. That's really what we're talking about here. So when we face challenges like, I don't want to call that person because I don't know them well enough and I don't know how they'll respond to my request, or I don't want to ask for clarity because I don't want to look silly. I don't want to share my perspective because I don't want to be wrong. I don't want to answer the question because I don't want to feel embarrassed. On the one hand, yeah, it makes sense not to have those feelings, not to want to be uncomfortable. But from another perspective, it doesn't make sense at all. We're not helping ourselves. And we are almost certainly not being true to our values. So what we can see then is for each of those examples of psychological rigidity, we also have an example of psychological flexibility. We're able to move from mental time travel to present moment awareness, for example, from automatic action to committed action, and so on. And the point here is that this is very much a journey, and it's not like flicking a switch. Like any other skills, they take a little while to acquire. They definitely take practice. But as anyone who knows me will be used to me saying, it's about little and often, and the cultivation of habits, not wholesale reinvention of self. And I think the other word I throw into the mix to really underline this is that it is about the intentional. We're doing things because we know them to be helpful. It's because it's what we want to do, not because our mind is telling us or our gut is telling us how awful it would be, but rather using something much more fundamental and long-lasting to guide our behavior: values. Now, what's really important here is that nothing I'm suggesting here is going to remove challenges. It's going to equip people with the skills to navigate those challenges much more sustainably. And then we can look back and not say, that was fun, but you probably won't say, that was fun. I enjoyed that. It sparked joy. No. But we can look back with a sense of satisfaction. Yes, I did what needed to be done, or I'm glad I did that, or I'm satisfied with how I behaved, which is so much more welcome than looking back with regret or feeling like we didn't live up to our own standards. So you can find out so much more about this skill set by visiting the website at worklifepsych.com. Obviously, we've covered these skills in great detail on the podcast and on the YouTube channel before. And the community of experts that brings this stuff to life, I have found to be incredibly generous with their content, with their materials. So apart from what I'm sharing here, there's an awful lot out there that you can find online that can fill in some of the gaps. But of course, feel free to get in touch with your questions about this. You can leave a comment under the video. You can email me directly, podcast@worklifepsych.com. I'd be delighted to answer your questions. If you didn't get a chance to ask me, if you were at the conference in Birmingham, or if this is the first time you're encountering these concepts, whatever the reason, I would love to be able to answer your questions. Hopefully that's filled in a few blanks for you. Hopefully it's inspired you to learn a little bit more about these skills. Hopefully you maybe want to acquire them or develop them yourselves. Okay, that's all from me for this video. Hope you found it useful. As ever, thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.